Hey everyone, it's a new week. That means it's time for SysAdmin Weekly. In this week's episode, Eric and I sit down and we're doing one of our Hyper-V for the VMware sysadmin episodes. In this episode, we're going to focus on licensing, everyone's favorite topic. Well, it's a sad fact that many VMware administrators are finding themselves in a situation where they have to evaluate other virtualization platforms. And one thing that commonly comes up when Hyper-V is involved is licensing. Do I have enough licenses to run Hyper-V in my environment? Can I just lift my virtual machines from VMware to Hyper-V? So everybody answering those questions and lots more in today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Hello, and it's that time again for SysAdmin Weekly, the show by sysadmins, for sysadmins, and for those folks that are working tirelessly in the trenches day in and day out to keep our digital world spinning. My name is Andy Syrewicze, and with me I've got my co-host, I've got Eric Siron. How's it going, Eric?
I'm all right. How you doing, Andy?
Doing good, doing good. Hey, we're a couple episodes in now. I feel like we're kind of, maybe, sort of getting the hang of this. Maybe. At some point, we'll get it right. So, we've had a couple of interesting topics on the show so far, but of course, today, and this is probably going to chase a couple of people away before we even really get started, we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite topic today, and that is licensing, right? Is that your favorite topic? I know it's probably...
Oh, yeah. I hope I get a birthday cake that says, here's your licensing birthday, or...
Oh, licensing. Well, it's a necessary evil, and I guess that's why we're talking about it. But before we get to that, a couple of things that I want to, announce some housekeeping things for the show here. And so to keep this show timely, I mean, weekly is in the name, right? There's a couple of things I want to do during the intro, starting from this episode, I guess. And I figure what we could do, Eric, is talk about some eye-catching news that, kind of caught our eye from the week of the recording. So, for example, this particular episode, we are recording on the evening of April 24th, 2025. And there's been a lot of interesting IT news happening lately, so we'll get into that. We can talk about any current interesting tech projects that we're working on. And then the other thing that I guess kind of a call to action for our listeners/viewers, if you have any interesting or funny sysadmin tales from the trenches and you would like us to, talk about them or at least tell the story on an episode of SysAdmin Weekly, you can always reach us at contact@sysadminweekly.com. That will get you into our inboxes and I don't know, something about sysadmin stories is one of my favorite pastimes. And it's, I would love at some point, my hope is we get enough of them. At some point we can do like I don't know exactly what I want to call it yet. I used to do Battle of the Bands back when I was younger. So it'd be like Battle of the sysadmin stories. Which one is the best type of thing? We count down our top 10 sysadmin stories. I'm getting carried away now. Anyway.
You want to do a whole bracket and...
There we go. We'll do a whole bracket. We'll let the community
down to there can be only one.
There can be only one. There's our Highlander. That might be, of all the podcasts I've done over the years, that might be the first Highlander reference we've ever had. So you get to put that together in your cap.
I'm disappointed in all of your other guests then. That's heartbreaking.
Anyway. Well, I'm going to keep this show moving here. And so I guess what I'm going to do, Eric, here, when we talk about news, again, we're recording this on April 24th, 2025. This episode will probably get published in 2 or 3 weeks. But when we talk about April, March, I mean, heck, anything in Q1, really, has there been any major tech news stories that have really caught your eye?
Oh, well, on the spot. Man, yes, there's been tons, and of course now I can't think of any. The one
that's how that works.
The most recent thing I saw was Intel laying off another 20,000 people after what they just had 15,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, that and it kind of burns at me because this is my industry, right? And I will say, one of the person who was reporting it was like, "Oh, it's such a terrible time in tech right now. It's so bad. It's so bad. It's so bad." And I agree. However, I would also like to point out for everybody out there who's getting nervous, it really is hitting middle management the hardest.
Yeah.
And
Seems to be.
where it's going to impact a lot of our guys in the trenches and gals, folks in the trenches, is going to be your middle managers are now doing everything they can to survive. And to do that, they have to look like they contribute something, which means they're probably going to be extra obnoxious for a while. So I'm sorry for you and all of the busy work that's headed your way as these people try to stay alive. So I don't know if that's good or bad. At least if you're listening to this and you're a sysadmin, you probably going to keep your job. I don't think because when they say that like everything is bad in tech right now, I think a lot of us are okay. I know I personally would not be doing a lot of job hopping right now and
Yeah.
watching very closely these companies who have decided that the best way to fix things is just to let people go. I don't,
Yeah, I've never
you know,
understood that myself personally.
it just doesn't. It never seems to work the way they want it to. So, and we could go into, there's way more here than we have time for to really tear that apart, and also what is happening in general and everything else. I would like to kind of bring a little bit of comfort to the my fellow sysadmins out there. We are not the heads that they're hunting
Yeah.
in a bad way. So
Yeah.
you may be out there like it's really hard to find something, and I can feel that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But as far as us getting downsized, it kind of seems like we're already, as an industry, as our tier of the industry, sysadmins, we already seem to be running fairly lean. So it's going to be, if you have a job, you can probably keep it for the most of us. So
Yeah. Fingers crossed for all of us in the industry,
yeah,
of course. I did see that news story about Intel. I remember there were some interesting comments. A lot of them I agreed with. I think one of the things I see is that AMD continues to put the screws to Intel. AMD is just rocking it right now. Um, on top of that, I, I think ARM kind of rules
yeah,
the
absolutely.
world at this stage. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean?
Yeah, and I know that so my off-camera persona is quite a bit more irreverent. And I kind of don't care, and uh, Intel has been one of my least favorite companies for a very long time, and I'm sad to see it hitting people who had nothing to do with it. But I never thought they were in it for the long haul. It always seemed like they didn't care. They were convinced they were number one, and they never really did anything to hang on to it except run around and throw their weight. And I never really felt like they had a whole lot to back it up with. So, and
Yeah,
it's
it's been.
interesting because if you heard the new CEO was like, "I want to get us back, I want to make us an engineering company," and like, so what were you?
I was gonna say, like, isn't that what they were supposed to be?
Yeah,
Right?
wasn't that like your whole thing? But it tracks. I mean, with the experiences I had with him, I never really, yeah. We could spend. I mean, again, here almost starting off another episode. So
I was gonna say, I think this is a whole episode in and of itself, talking about layoffs in tech or maybe job hunting in tech. I think there's something
sure.
there. So,
I think
um,
the other one would be the companies who are just completely making it on name alone.
yes,
That they
that's
had
true.
something in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and they got big enough to just bully everybody. And yeah, their tech doesn't really back up their mouth.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I'm gonna put both of those on the list. So good ideas there. I will say the news item for me, again being in the security space, was um, the near demise and subsequent happy ending of MITRE and the CVE program. So if folks aren't aware, the the budget talks. I'm not even sure budget talks were happening, but the budget for MITRE and CVE were basically going to run out. And the morning of, there was this, I don't know what happened. If the person responsible is watching this, that'd be really cool. But if you're on the line, if you're watching, like, thank you. I can only imagine the fire and brimstone that would have ensued if, MITRE and CVE just ceased to exist. Well, that wouldn't have happened, but no new CVEs would have happened, that's for sure. But the one funny joke that I keep seeing on the internet, at least in my security circles, is like, and I'm, I'm not trying to offend any of the religious crowd here. I just find it humorous. I see people saying that was the Easter miracle this year is because CVE and MITRE was going to die, and then all of a sudden
Then
it
doesn't.
wasn't anywhere. So anyway, so that's I found that humorous. So anyway, now that I've alienated a part of our audience, I'm gonna move on to the next item. I don't know if
Gotta have
there's
a
anything
sense
you
of
want to add to
humor.
that.
Gotta have a sense of humor if you're gonna survive in this industry.
That's right. So I just, the whole, death and resurrection thing. It was kind of funny. So anyway, anything you want to add to that, Eric, before we move on to this week's main topic?
I'm with everybody else with the collective. I'm glad that did not die.
Yeah, no joke. And I mean, I think of like what would have happened if those programs just went away. I know they were planning on dumping like all the information, all the data to a GitHub repo. So like, can you imagine like, okay, I'm looking up a certain CVE. I'm going to go out to a GitHub repo to find that information. A little odd, but at least the information would have still been available. And I mean, what would have happened to new vulnerabilities? Now,
How many products out there scrape MITRE.org?
oh, no joke. No joke. I know guys that they are involved in threat intel in the cybersecurity industry, and like, they were they were not doing well that morning that all that was going down, so
No,
getting real
no.
nervous about it. So anyway, well, again, folks, if there's a particular news story you found interesting that we haven't talked about, or you have, again, any sysadmin tales from the trenches, again, be sure to send us that information at contact@sysadminweekly.com. I'd be happy to share that on the show, assuming it's PG-13 rated. So anyway, let's get to everyone's favorite topic, Eric. We're going to be talking about licensing. And again,
We keep threatening him with that, and here we are. We're
I
gonna.
know, it's here now. The axe is about to fall. And when I say licensing, we are talking about Hyper-V from a VMware sysadmin's perspective. So we're going to be talking about how to license Hyper-V environments versus VMware environments, right? And I got to put a big fat disclaimer on this episode before we go any further. So licensing is a legal matter, right? And Eric and I, as knowledgeable as we are, we try to do our best to stay up to date on the steaming pile of poo that is licensing. But things change, and sometimes they change frequently. Anything that we say or advise in this episode, we highly urge you to go and verify that information with your vendor licensing expert, that person at Microsoft that is assigned to your organization to help you with these things. Or if you're a small business, go talk to an MSP. Or if you're an MSP, you can always reach out to your suppliers. I know CDW has Microsoft licensing experts. I know Ingram has Microsoft licensing experts. Don't just take our word for it. Like I said, we try to be 100% factual and correct. But again, licensing is licensing, right? So with that said, did I miss anything with our legal disclaimer, Eric? I know you're not a lawyer, but I think between the two of
I
us, we
do
could
know
cover our
one.
rear end.
I do know one who's an IP lawyer, actually. So I'll run it by her and make sure that we have properly protected ourselves here. But yeah, the one thing I really, really like to remind people is no matter what we say, you try to carry this podcast into court and go, look what this guy said there. That's not going to work for you. So, and this is the biggest problem is obviously the idea with them going after people, they really want to get the folks who are deliberately trying to
Yeah.
steal. That's who they want.
Yep.
However, I will tell you that they have also, I know this for a fact, that they have gone into relatively small companies, 10, 20, 30 users, turned them upside down, shook them out, and they find them every time. You may be able to cut a deal, but they always get fines, and it's always more than it would have been to just do it right.
It
And a lot of times they can make a very honest plea of ignorance and it doesn't stick. So,
Yeah, I think a lot of
yeah,
times
take that seriously.
I think a lot of times it depends on the auditor you get too. So
It does.
I've seen it go
They
both ways.
rarely leave without doing something. It's never just okay, you messed up, but we're going to overlook it this time. It's pretty much never that.
Yep. Agreed. Saw a customer get dinged on, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, is VM license mobility one time, right? They didn't account for virtual machines moving around from host to host.
Okay, now that's really, yeah, see, that's getting into the weeds too. That auditor was
Yep.
trying to find stuff because
And it
sometimes they'll
was
miss those things, but
correct. And it was a VMware environment, but it was a Microsoft licensing audit, so they still had to account for VM mobility. So had us pull vMotion logs, things like that, so they could see how often VMs were moving around and when. And it was pretty clear that this was not a case of deliberate obfuscation or anything like that. It was completely just a miscalculation, an
oops,
oopsie.
right.
And they made the customer in this case true up, and that was the extent of it. So I mean, it was
They
as
got
good
off
of an
light.
out.
That rarely happens.
Oh yeah, they got off as that. I mean, that went as well as it could have. Now I've seen it go the other way too, where like you said, they turn the whole company upside down and shake them out for every penny they can possibly get. Right. So anyway,
And the other
so
part that we need to make sure everybody understands is if you've made somebody angry, all they have to do is pick up the phone and call you in. And if you get caught, then they get a bonus. So if you've made anybody mad, that's how the auditors show up.
that's right.
And you
That is
can't even
right.
really do anything about it because everything is completely legal in that situation.
Yup. And
Yeah, get right
that's
quickly.
right. And I mean, I'm assuming most of the people on this watching and listening to the show are sysadmins or are sysadmin adjacent. Um, if you never dealt with an audit before, you don't want to deal with one. You don't want that auditor to come knocking because um, I want to say the average. I've gone through the technical aspect of these audits a couple of times throughout my career. I think the average amount of time I've spent on audits is something around the tune of 80 working hours. I mean, like just 2 weeks of full-time hours just gone out the window
Yeah,
where I was
it's
doing nothing
horrible.
but helping auditors.
It is not fun. It's
Nope,
really unpleasant.
it isn't. So anyway,
And of course, if you do anything that irritates them, well, then
it's even
you got
worse.
to be nice the whole time,
I know.
which can be hard when you're in hour 60. Like, I have real work to do. Why are we?
Yep. So, well, Eric, I figure what a good place to start with would be just a quick overview of real high level here, VMware's licensing versus Microsoft licensing. Now, Microsoft licensing, when we're talking about on-premise, we're talking about Hyper-V, right? We've got our core licensing, right? And you're choosing standard data center, right? I know you're going to get into that stuff here in a little bit. On the VMware side, they have their own licensing mechanism, right? You've got per core licensing in VMware is what they've been doing for a long time now. I've got gray hairs in my beard. I remember the days when it was per socket,
Mhm.
long time ago. But it is per core these days. And so, I mean, the licensing mechanisms aren't that different. I think the thing that surprises people, like, yeah, you go license your environment to properly run VMware. guess what? You still got to buy pretty much the same Hyper-V licenses, right? Or not Hyper-V, the same Windows Server licenses. Getting ahead of
Right.
myself.
I was about to counter what you had just said. I think their licensing models are radically different, even though they use the same words. You are licensing the vSphere product and its little pieces, ESX and whatever else. Whereas with Microsoft, the hypervisor costs you zero.
Ah, yes, that is true.
And and if
Important distinction.
you can buy, so and remembering that Microsoft and VMware approach this whole thing from a philosophical difference, very foundationally different. VMware is selling you a virtualization, what would you want to call it? Almost an ecosystem.
Exactly. Yep.
So you're getting hypervisor, you're getting hypervisor management, you're getting all the like vSAN, and I can't even again on the spot,
Epicenter,
I
HA,
wasn't prepared to think. It's all those things,
Yep.
all the little boxes, right? That go, and it's all about VMware and their virtualization
Yep.
ecosystem.
Yep.
Microsoft sees the hypervisor as a commodity. It's just a thing. It's just another
Oh, yeah.
part. It's a DNS, a DHCP, virtualization, right? It's just another piece. So they don't see that for instance, the failover clustering that you were talking about, that's a separate bit. It integrates, but it's not a Hyper-V technology
Right. Correct.
any more than it's a SQL technology or SQL is pretty much the only other thing I fail over. So I'll let somebody else chime in, whatever. What file servers? I don't know. Whatever else y'all want to
Any
cluster.
any
You
Windows
know,
Server role basically is going to be licensed via the same licensing mechanism. It's when you get into like the SQL stuff, the Exchange stuff. Now you're talking separate licenses, or I'm going to say it, remote desktop services,
yes.
aka what we
So
used to call terminal services. Now you've got Cal licenses and all. Well, you've
what?
got Cal licenses for AD. I'm getting way
And
deeper into
honestly, it's
that side
only
of it
the
than we need
cows
to.
because if you think
Yeah.
about it, none of their infrastructure components have separate licenses. It's only their application servers, which would be SQL, Exchange, so on and so forth. Uh, uh, Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, all of that is Windows Server component. So it just comes with the Windows Server license,
Right.
right?
And
So
so
Hyper-V is the same in that case. It's just part of it. So you do not pay for the Hyper-V technology or any of its pieces,
right.
if that
Right.
makes sense. So
Yeah.
that separates it very, very much away from the whole VMware way of doing things, I guess. So what you were saying before I cut you off was that people who have bought and paid for all of their VMware licenses and are fully licensed to run Microsoft Windows in that probably don't need to spend any more money. They probably have paid everything they need to to wholesale switch over to the Hyper-V platform.
Yep. Because to your point, Hyper-V is a role in Windows Server. And when we talk about virtualized environments on the Microsoft side, really what you're licensing is Windows Server
Yes.
and
So the
all of its
way I
roles and
try to
features.
explain it to everybody is it's an instance-based license. When you spin up a unique Windows Server kernel, that's where you need to start thinking license. Every time another kernel goes up, bam, license. Kernel, license, right? So when you're sitting down going, all right, I need to check all my boxes and everything. How many kernels do you have going? And then we would then next move on. Where's the mobility? Where could they go? So you were talking, and maybe we should come back to that. That gets a little bit advanced with the mobility. So let's shelve that for the moment and talk really about the whole thing of it. You got to think about the instances, and then there are two instance types, which would be the physical instance and then the virtual instance. And Hyper-V containers, I believe, are considered. And do you remember that one? That's the only question mark. I know it.
Because I was going to bring that up actually, because when we talk about running kernels, a there's two differences here. You got Hyper-V containers, but then you got Windows containers,
Yes,
and
Windows containers don't require.
because it's process virtualization is all it
Correct.
is.
Correct. There's no separate kernel, so
Let's see,
no
Hyper-V.
license.
Anytime I've run into containers in the Microsoft ecosystem, it's either been via something like Windows containers, or they go straight to AKS,
Right.
Azure Kubernetes Service, either in
Right.
Azure or, and I'll link our recent episode where we talked a little bit about this. You can now run AKS on-prem using Azure Local. Um, so yeah, in terms of the licensing for that, I'm not. See, and this is where I get a little fuzzy because all of the environments I've worked with, we've thrown a data center license on each host, and we were just going to
And then
go.
you don't have to worry about it. So
Yeah.
what I would say is, I'm actually going to look here a little bit. As I recall, though, a Hyper-V container, assuming it's got Windows in it,
Yep.
that's another Windows kernel. Got to
Yep.
license it. But as
Now,
you say, most of the places you run into who are doing that are doing data centers, so you never really think about it. Like, it doesn't matter.
right. And I think that's a good segue, really quick, Eric, while we verify the live, while we're recording, while we verify the Hyper-V container piece. Can you tell our viewers from a licensing perspective, especially in terms of the amount of workloads you're allowed to run, the difference between Windows Server Standard and Windows Server Data Center licensing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So
Evil
we're
Eye.
gonna go one level higher first. We're gonna back it up one more level on the checklist. All right. You have to license the entire physical unit. So that's core based licensing. And you have to buy for a minimum of 2 sockets, even if you only have 1 socket. And you have to license each socket for a minimum of 8 cores. So the super short version of that is you're going to buy at least 16 core licenses for every single physical unit. And that's data center or standard. They both work out the same way on the per core licensing. If you have 10 cores per socket, then you have now 20. So, 16, 18, 20, 22, whatever, until you have licensed every single physical core. That's where you start. And that applies for standard or data center. You got to hit all those cores. So for standard edition, as soon as you have hit all of those licenses, now you can run Windows Server Standard on the physical unit or not. It doesn't matter. And you can run 2 virtual instances of Windows Server Standard. Okay. So you're like, all right, what if I want to do 3? Now, what you're going to hear in a lot of places, oh, you have to go to data center because with data center, there's no limit. As soon as you hit all of your cores licensed, you can run as many as you want, as many Windows Server instances as you want. A data center standard doesn't matter. Anything, all of it goes. However, there's that gap in the middle because it's like standard. What does that work out to? It used to be about, depending on your individual organization's deals, between $800 and $1,000, I think, to license a
And it's been
host
a
for
while
standard.
since I've looked at the MSRP, but
Let's
yeah,
just say
it
a
sounds
thousand
about right.
dollars. I don't know either. It used
Yeah.
to be around 800. Let's just say 1,000 because I don't know. Haven't had to deal with it in a long time either, not directly. So let's just say $1,000. Then data center's like $12,000 for the 16
It's
cores.
a big difference
Yeah.
between the two.
So you're like, wait a minute, hold on. So if I go from 2 virtual machines to 3, now I got to spend another 10 grand. Is that no, no, you don't. You don't. You just relicense the same host. Okay. So you spend 1,000 to 2,000 and now you can run 4 and then
AKA license stacking.
stacking.
Yep.
Literally, you're like, so what happens to that extra physical one? Sorry. Right. It's a thing. You're getting 1 physical for that box and 2 virtual instances for that box. They don't move. And this gets back to the mobility thing, which still on the shelf, but they don't move. You cannot just you can't migrate those in any way. We'll come back to it. Uh, but again, there's that gap in there between the standard and data center. Now, your exact pricing is going to change. And I was reading we'll talk about sysadmin horror stories, a guy came in and was working with an org who is 501c3. It's a nonprofit in the United States. And under Microsoft and a whole lot of other companies, if you're a nonprofit, you can get really good software pricing. And apparently, this poor company, their MSP, had been selling them standard retail. And
Oh,
yeah, so bad shame on you, MSP, for doing that. Um, yeah, so if you're in the United States, look up TechSoup.
yes.
Funny name, but TechSoup, that's where a lot of people go.
Great resource. Great
And
resource.
yeah, make sure you're getting the cheapest pricing you're eligible for. Don't overspend, and especially don't jump to Data Center Edition if you have like 3 or 4 virtual machines. So, but your pricing is going to determine where it makes sense to jump to Data Center, because some people are going to get Data Center for $800 or $900. So do that, right? Because then you don't have to think about it. You don't worry. You're going to pass your audits. Um, I think that pretty well covers it. Unless did I miss anything you're thinking of?
No, I don't think
And,
so. I think you covered everything.
and of course, I'm digging through the whole licensing thing on those containers. And what I remember now is like, well, as long as you're only talking about Windows containers, those don't count. Like, okay, but what if I'm not talking about Windows containers? What if I slipped over to Hyper-V containers? And people really don't want to answer that one.
And see, the thing is like I said, folks I've talked with and deployments I've seen rarely seen. Like
You
everybody's going straight to
right.
KKS these days.
Right. They're not common, and usually the organizations who are going to do Hyper-V containers are usually already just paying for data center, because at a certain point, it's almost, your company gets big enough, your budget is big enough, it's almost not worth asking.
Yeah.
Um,
So while you do
okay,
that, there's
no, they are. It is exactly what I thought. The Hyper-V containers are just another virtual OSE.
yeah.
They're used interchangeably as far as licensing goes.
Yep.
So if you have standard edition, you can do a full virtual machine or a Hyper-V container. Again, the kernel in the virtual machine or the container is what we're talking about. If you put Linux in there, it doesn't, because you're not licensing the virtual machine, you're licensing the kernel, right? And that's another thing that people get hung up on. Well, what if I want to do Debian? Nobody cares.
For it.
Microsoft is not interested in
See,
licensing the virtual
right
machine. They're
there.
licensing the kernel. Debian's kernel, not their kernel. They don't care about it. Do whatever you want. Okay. So it's only about and everything we have said so far is pretty much Windows Server only. So like Windows Desktop is a whole different ballgame.
That's the whole thing. Yeah.
And that one can get really scary. If you're not using it as a remote, then it's just you have to buy a copy of Windows whatever for that box. Uh, I stay away from desktop licensing because it terrifies me. It's way scarier, actually, I think, than
You and me
servers.
both.
Like, I buy a computer with Windows on it, and that's all I need to know. Either Dell or HP or Lenovo, whoever they dealt with that, I don't care. It's not my because I don't want to know. But almost nobody puts Windows Desktop on a server with the intent of nobody connecting to it. And as soon as you connect to it, now it needs a desktop cal, or sorry, not desktop cal. What are those called? The VDA, is that right?
The remote
Virtual
access. It's like
RDS.
yeah, it's a remote access license is basically
Yeah,
what it
and it
is.
can get like more than one too. Like you may need more than one kind.
Yeah.
VDA licensing is disgusting and terrifying and horrible, and I hate it. And someday I'm gonna have to research it because I think we'll wind up having to do a podcast on that too. But today, I just don't want to.
You and me both. So yeah, our scope is Windows Server and VMware related licensing, right? And so
Yes,
there's two things I wanted to call out that complicate this discussion a little bit. Um, the first is VM mobility. The other one I wanted to talk about, well, let's stick with the example of a Windows Server Standard license. So I have a host. I fully license all the cores with Windows Server Standard. I'm allowed the physical operating system instance, and I'm allowed 2 VMs. So the one question that always comes up is like, okay, can I install stuff on the physical OSE? You know, for example,
and I'm
backup
glad people
software.
even ask, because some people don't, and they just start doing stuff, and then the auditors smack them down. Like, I don't
Yep.
understand.
Yep. And so I'd like to get your take on this, Eric, but the understanding that I've always had and I've been told is if I am installing something that is in support of the virtual environment, that is 100% good to go. No problems with that. So, for example, backup software. So, if I need to back up my virtual machines through the hypervisor layer, that's completely kosher.
It
So,
can get a little sticky, like if you're using one central host
yes.
and you're funneling other things to it. Now they're like, it gets a little, be
Yep.
careful. Agents
Because
are always fine. Um,
now that
yeah.
comes back to the question of VM mobility. So as we know, with you can run a standalone Hyper-V host or VMware host, like many of you have been this whole time. But we know that we can cluster them too, right? And VMs can move freely from host to host in the cluster. And so you could be in a situation where, okay, you've licensed both hosts in a 2-node cluster with Windows Server Standard, right? So the line of thinking there is like, okay, you fully license all the cores on both hosts. You should be able to run 4 VMs, right? Well, I got to reboot this host. So I'm going to move these VMs over to the other host. Now there's 4 VMs running on a host that's licensed for 2. And so if I remember correctly, and Eric, you're going to have to keep me honest on this, I forget what the terminology is. There is terminology in the license that says something along the lines of a recovery situation. I think it's 90 days. Every 90 days, you are allowed to, quote unquote, recover one of those virtual OSEs somewhere. And it's
So
not allowed to move any more than once every 90 days. Again, don't
that
quote me on the language.
verbiage that you're thinking about goes back prior to virtualization. So the purpose was I bought a server. I bought a physical machine. This is always fun. What does the word server actually mean? I bought a physical machine, server class hardware, installed Windows Server on it. Okay, and 2 days later, that server explodes. But that was the box that I licensed. What happens? You can instantly restore to another server and just keep going, but you can't move that license again for 90 days. But the idea was to keep people from oops, 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 and then doing really silly things with their licenses and basically, figuring out how to get the one license across a whole bunch of machines. So Microsoft trying to say, okay, we understand things fail, but also don't try to rob us. We'll send our auditors, and you're not going to like that. So that is where that comes from. Okay, the idea of the live migration or vMotion, not really what they had in mind with that one. It would work. It does follow the letter of the law. If you literally migrate it and then don't move it again for 90 days, yeah. However, this is the fun part. That applies to the physical license, not the virtual OSE that come with it. So you would have to move all of the virtual machines over and then not use that physical license on that machine ever again for 90 days.
Which we
And
know is
certainly
not
not while you're using it on the other one. So which
right.
basically means as soon as you turn it back on, if those machines automatically fail back because that's how your cluster is configured, well, you just violated your license agreement. Yay, good for you.
Yeah. And this is where data
So
center licensing comes in, because you can run as many instances as you want. It doesn't matter that they're moving around from host to host within the
right,
cluster,
as
right?
long as all the hosts are licensed fully for data center, yeah, they can move as much as they want, you want, whatever. If you're really, really, and I would never do this because I think it's too scary, and I think that the money is not. I think the payoff is not worth it. But let's say you have a 4 node cluster with 20 virtual machines, and you're like, well, none of my nodes can actually run 20 machines at the same time, so maybe I won't license them, but for say 12.
See,
Yeah, I wouldn't.
I uh,
I
I
would
could
not do that.
I could
But
see it working, but as you and I both know, and people watching slash listening, things happen and things change, and who is going to keep track of all the math there, right?
yeah. And then an
Yeah.
auditor comes in, they pull your logs, and the logs do show migrations, and oops, you hit 13 at one time.
And so this always brings up the question, right? Like, okay, should I just go straight to data center? Well, of course, we're going to give the famous IT answer of it depends, because there is a tipping point where data center fiscally makes more sense. But again, it depends on each individual situation, right?
And again,
Oh,
call your reseller. And if
yeah.
you're in that place too, where you're like, I'm not really sure, then you can probably get a discount. So do that. Don't pay
Right.
retail. If you have one box, okay, fine, maybe retail's fine. But it doesn't take very many before it's definitely worth your time to not pay retail anymore. So yeah, make that phone call.
And to add complexity to this VM mobility discussion, there's also a VM mobility component to SQL and probably Exchange licensing. Because I remember there's some audits I've been done where the organization got dinged on not just the Windows Server licensing because of mobility, but because a SQL instance was bouncing around as well too. And now,
Yes.
again, my information is dated there. Maybe that's changed. To my knowledge, it hasn't
I don't
changed.
think it has. I think it's the
But
same as it's always been.
yep, that's another thing to consider too. So if you're running SQL in house, um, that's something you want to look at as well. And again, talk to your licensing expert.
And I would like to have another podcast, Andy, because this is something that has kind of been on my mind for years. Is that maybe if you're putting SQL inside HA virtual machines, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe we need to revisit smarter ways to do HA that don't depend on that kind of a thing. Because I'm getting to where I don't push clusters as hard as I used to,
Yeah.
and so
Well,
I
there's a
think
lot
that
of
would
different
be
ways to make the workloads resilient other than clustering. I mean, personally, I still love clustering because I've been doing it most of my career, but I'm with you. I agree. It's not the end all be all, you know?
it's not. It's really great on something that has no other HA built in. It's tremendous for that. Then you get into things that not only have HA but have HA that's better for them than the Hyper-V HA. So
AD.
cool, we can skip AD. AD is number one. So with that, we can say, oh, if I have an HA virtual machine, I have to license it to run on every host in the cluster. I have to have enough licenses on all the physical. Yeah, let me use the correct terminology. I need to have enough licenses on every physical box in the cluster for that virtual machine to bounce to. That single virtual machine, which means that I would pay the exact same amount of money to have one instance of Windows Server on all of the physical hosts running all the time. And in those, I can put this software, and it can HA itself. So that's
VM
what the
itself, yeah, the VM itself is never moving.
doesn't
And if
have to.
that host goes belly up, or one of the four hosts goes belly up, I mean,
It's gone. Okay. And so I think we need to have another podcast on other ways to HA besides virtual machines.
that's a good point. And I think another one, and I thought of this earlier today when I was prepping for this episode. We need to have a podcast episode that specifically focuses on the question: Hyper-V host as part of the domain or not? That's a good.
I have a one sentence answer for that, so I don't know.
That'd be a good one for our VMware folks because, from the VMware side, typically your hosts work part of your domain, right? Maybe they, yeah. So I mean, they're used to one answer already, but yeah, I'm getting ahead of ourselves here. It's a preview to another episode.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many people are going to be surprised when I say the thing that they don't agree with. That's going to be.
Hey,
I
that's what
know
the
there's more than a
podcast is
few.
for.
Yeah, I know there's more than a few. Oh, I know what he's going to say. Like,
Do you? I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about, and folks, you don't know what he's gonna say. We'll get there. We're gonna keep you all in suspense. Anyway, the one thing we've talked about a lot of different licensing stuff here so far, and I think we've been pretty clear on most of it, right? You've
there's one
got
big one that we really need. Well, there's two. There's two. There's two. So the first one I think started in 2022. And you now actually can buy virtual instance licensing. You can actually license a virtual instance specifically to solve the mobility problem. You can do that now. What I have heard, please don't quote me on this again, mainly because I just don't know, but also because don't quote people on licensing,
right.
is that yet it's not cheap. It's not cheap. It may still wind up being smarter to license traditionally. I guess if you have a virtual machine and it's in like a 32 node cluster, which I have never encountered in my career, but let's say you've got one virtual machine in a 32 node cluster, maybe it's worth it. But again, if you've got the money for a 32 node cluster, are you really worried about it?
I've seen one close to that size, but never 32 nodes. I saw a 26 node once, but that was about it.
Wow, that's impressive.
That's the biggest I've run into, So
I deliberately don't. I mean, I could theoretically in a couple of places, I could probably put something together of that size, but I deliberately make them smaller than that on purpose.
this was a hoster. So I mean,
Oh,
that explains
yeah.
why.
Yeah, that makes more sense. That
Yep.
makes more.
So um
And
yeah,
then the
so
other thing that's new in 2025, sorry to cut you off,
no, that's what I was getting to.
they have the pay-as-you-go license now in 2025, which I will tell you, everything I've heard on that says it's almost always not worth the money. If you're going to spin up an instance for a week or two, maybe, but it gets expensive real fast and compared to just licensing the
Yep.
host.
Yep.
But it's an option and it's there if you need it. And it's kind of to counter the Azure pay-as-you-go thing. So, so you do have virtual instance licensing now, and you do have pay-as-you-go option.
I suspect they added the pay as you go option for those organizations that have just gotten used to OpEx, right? They've just gotten used to paying monthly and that's how they want to do it, right?
Yeah.
So that makes
Yep.
sense.
And I guess if you're bursting, if you are legitimately that guy, yeah, maybe it is fiscally. But if you also have a habit of I'm going to stand this up for a week or two, and then 6 months later, oh yeah, I got to do something with that. That's going to cost you. Don't do that.
Yeah, just a bit. It costs you just a bit for sure.
Yeah.
Um, the other question that always comes up during this part of the conversation is like, oh, well, Azure Local, right? You know, how does all this licensing apply to Azure Local? I believe you and I talked about that a little bit in our Azure Local episode. So
Yeah. Probably.
I will link that in the show notes below, folks. We did a whole episode specifically on Azure Local, the artist formerly known as Azure Stack HCI. That should cover that. I'm trying to think if there's anything we left out. I'm sure there is. It's licensing, but I
Oh,
think we covered all the
there's
good
got to
stuff.
be something we left out. So Windows Server applies only. No Windows Desktop. No non-Microsoft. Still can't run whatever Apple's thing is on anything but Apple hardware. The Apple will come for you, and you won't like it. Um, Microsoft will. Don't ask, don't tell. But Apple will not like it. What else? You
We
got your
talked about
mobility. You got your
mobility,
core
yeah.
licensing.
Data center versus
Downgrade
standards.
licenses. You have downgrade licenses. So if you buy, you can only buy from Microsoft and direct resellers. You can only buy this edition of Windows Server, but you're licensed to run up until you hit your instance cap. You can run any version currently supported by Microsoft, which goes back to what 2016, I think, is the oldest one still in support.
Yeah, I think the oldest production box I touch anymore is 2019, but yeah.
Oh, I envy you. I have long ongoing struggles to get rid of some 2008 R2 machine.
Oof. Oof. Uh,
Oh,
I'm sorry. I, I've got a buddy of mine that can top that. Um, he still has a couple of NT server boxes lying around his old enterprise
I
environment.
know where a couple are in the world. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to do with them, but
Yup.
they're out there.
They are.
They're out there.
They are.
They're surly. They're not happy, friendly people at all.
Hey, if I had to manage NT server on a regular basis in 2025, I would be pretty surly about it too. So,
You know what I want though? This is I'm glad I don't have a boss lady like you need to stop talking now. But Windows NT had the hand cursors. You remember those? Still my favorite cursor pack of all, and Microsoft got rid of them. You can't. I don't. You'd have to find. I think NT in '95, and I forget when. But at some point, I want to turn on the hand cursor set, and it wasn't there anymore. And I was no, very sad.
in my back in my MSP days, I once got a ticket, and I went out on site and everything. They were adamant about this. I don't know why. The whole ticket, the whole purpose of it. This is back in my L1 days. I need my mouse cursor to look like a dinosaur. there, there was a mouse cursor pack where it would make your mouse cursors look like various dinosaurs. And I'm like, okay, somebody spent money to have me come out and make this change. I had that in my bio for the longest time. Oh, Andy Syrewicze can build a data center and change a mouse cursor to look like a dinosaur. Anyway,
Yeah, that would be a very unique one. If I came across that resume, I would like this guy's at least getting a phone call.
Well, there we go. So, uh, anyway, there's one key point before we wrap up, Eric, I want to come back to. So again, for those folks that are coming, from the VMware side, right? And why is that? Because of the lovely debacle that Broadcom has created over the last couple of years. I saw a Reddit post today. I forget how many cores they were talking about, but I think it was for a 3-year license. Their bill went from 750,000 to 6.5 million for the same 3-year period. And so these are the types of increases that people are getting, and hence a lot of people are saying bye bye vSphere, and they're looking for other options, right? And so this is if you take nothing else away from this licensing episode, if you take nothing else away, chances are, if you are properly licensed for all of your virtual machine workloads in your VMware environment, chances are, not guaranteed, but chances are you are properly licensed to run those same VMs within a Hyper-V environment. Now,
No more money. You've
yep,
already spent it.
correct. Now, that said, when you migrate platforms, right, things are going to change. Maybe you're going to consolidate some VMs. Maybe this thing that is a single server right now, we need to scale it out a little bit. So we're creating more VMs. So counts might change. You might need to look at that and make sure you true up. But if you're just going to do an apples to apples comparison, you should be set. But that said, again, talk with your licensing experts. Make sure everything's on the up and up before you just assume that's the case, right?
Right. And honestly, the migration is going to be worse than the money.
Oh, agreed.
Because even
Agreed.
if you're not correct, you can't be that far off unless again, assuming that you were at least trying to license correctly in the first place. I've run into a few places where they didn't understand licensing at all. And if an auditor came in here today, you would be sunk. Moving to Hyper-V would not fix that. You would have to pay for but you need to pay for them anyway because, right? So, but migration is going to be the hard part. And there you go. There's another topic for you: is how do we actually do that? But fiscally speaking, I don't see any possible way to spend more money on Hyper-V than you would have on VMware. I don't think it can be done.
I'm sure somebody out there listening is saying, "Hold my beer."
Away. Yeah, I have a way, and okay, that would be one of those things that's going to be so uncommon that might actually make it into an episode. We have this
If you
one.
are that person, contact at sysadminweekly.com. I would love to hear about it because
I want to see how you do that.
right. So,
I'm not counting. Well, we have 0 virtual machines running Windows Server. Now we have to license the physical box. That doesn't count. And even then, it wouldn't count because you still would overpay for the VMware. You're not going to have to pay that license anymore, so it still wouldn't. Yeah,
yeah,
I still don't see how that would work.
I'm not sure it can be done, but
I don't think it could be done, but we'll find out. So if somebody can do it, they'll be sure to let us know. So
that's right. Well, I think we've probably talked enough about licensing for. I was going to say one day, but I think that's enough for me for maybe like the next 30 days.
yeah, we'll find some other stuff to talk about. We won't do this again for a while. Sorry, folks. It had to be done.
That's right. Well, I guess with that, Eric, we can go ahead and wrap things up here. Folks, I guess first off, thanks for spending some time with us today. We are available on all the major podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, or YouTube. If you want to watch the video version of the show and see our smiling faces on camera. That said, we've got a lot of great written content in various places. We've got content out at projectrunspace.org. If you want to learn about what projectrunspace.org is, again, this is a Project Runspace sponsored podcast, but our very first episode 0, Eric gives a great description of what Project Runspace is, so be sure to check that out. I also blog occasionally out at andyontech.com. So I've been blogging about a lot of Linux stuff lately, so that's been one of my big projects lately. I've got a whole Linux data center thing going on in my basement. That's probably another conversation. Some Proxmox stuff too, when we're talking about virtualization. So that's probably an episode as well too. Eric is conversation on Proxmox. But yeah, be sure to check out those resources. And again, you can always watch the show every week. I am aiming for Thursdays as kind of the release date for our episodes. And again, if you want to be part of the show, you got a great story or you have a question or you just want to get our opinion on something, again, contact at sysadminweekly.com. So before we're all done here, Eric, anything you want to add? Anything I left out?
I think we hit all the points that we thought about.
I think so. I think so. The ones that we thought about, it's the ones we didn't think about are the ones that worries me.
Those are the ones that bite you. But, well, yeah, everybody's doing the best they can at that moment in time, and it just may not be that great.
That's right. Well, hopefully we covered 95% of it. I'll be happy with 95%. So anyway, thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate you being here. And we hope to catch you again next week for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.